And I'm starting the webinar now. We are now live. Okay, so hopefully everybody now can see. Can everybody see my screen?
Nope.
No.
Disappointing, so forgive me. There, now.
It's coming.
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, so to those people who are joining the webinar, we'll give a few minutes. We've got 300 people registered for our webinar this morning, HR leaders from the US and from Europe. So thank you very much to those people who are joining us. We'll give you a minute or so to join. For our attendees, please could you just make sure that you are on mute. Videos are off automatically, but attendees on mute. And that enables our panelists to be able to talk in the most effective way. So I think if everybody is ready, we are here, we are online, we've got people managing the chat for us. So with a bit of luck, good morning, everybody. And let me start off by making some introductions and saying an enormous thank you to the people who have joined us and whose faces you can see before you now. I'm going to start off with Anna Capitiano. Anna, thank you so much for agreeing to join us. When I asked for a description from Anna's PA, she said, please just introduce Anna as Director of HR for BT Consumer. And actually, Anna is way more exciting than the Director of HR for Consumer. She's a Chief People Officer. She's been a Transformation Director. She's got senior experience across a whole bunch of industries. She's lived in 5 countries and worked in over 45 countries in high-paced transformation, looking at business and fit. So we are extremely honoured to have you here. So thanks very much, Anna, for giving up your time.
Thank you for having me.
Denise is equally as exciting and worked with Anna, I think, for about 2 weeks, many moons ago. But Denise is Chief People Officer at dunnhumby, who are a data analytics and insight company. She's worked again for several really large global multinationals, predominantly in the tech space, though also including Coca-Cola, always with an international HR scope. Started life in consultancy and a focus on technology-led commercial HR approach that enables HR transformation. So Denise, thank you. Denise is also, we've only managed to nab her until 9 o'clock, so she will disappear quietly at 9 o'clock. It won't be a connection issue with luck before then. Thank you, Denise.
Thank you.
Next we have, I'm delighted, a lady who I've known for several years actually, which is fabulous, a lady called Sarah Vardy. Sarah's an OD expert. She's currently consulting, which is why she has a grey blob under her box, but the company is called Future Org Consulting Limited. And involved in a number of operating model and OD design projects, but has worked with global organisations. So companies like American Express, Thomson Reuters, Aviva, and almost everything that Sarah works on is driven by a client wanting to adapt to market conditions, to future-proof their business, or actually to change a business model that is just way out of line with where the world is today. And then last, but absolutely by no means least, let me introduce Hugo. Hugo and I have known each other for many years. Tucker Stone are a key partner for Talent Intuition and Stratagens. And Hugo is MD and co-founder. Tucker Stone, for those who don't know, is an HR and change search consultancy. It's been around for 10 years, successfully delivers across a really broad section of organisations from FTSE 50s to startups. So absolutely across the board, permanent and interim. And Hugo specialises in CPO roles. So he's normally our attendees' favourite person, but has a particular interest in OD and in diversity and inclusion. So massive thank you to all of our panellists for joining. We really appreciate it. A little bit about me. My name's Alison Ettridge. I am chief believer at a company called Talent Intuition. And I call myself a chief believer, not because it's a gimmick, but actually because I fundamentally believe that now is the time for organisations to look at external big data and analyze that to help to inform their decisions. And for us, we do that particularly around the supply of skills and into organizations as things change. We help organizations to optimize where they have people. So we give them data to inform real estate decisions and challenges. And we give organizations data to inform diversity. And they do that in two ways. So they buy Strategens from us, which is a platform. And the best way to describe it is we use data from the external world to answer some of your internal questions. And the belief bit comes from me thinking, when it comes to HR strategy, it pays to employ facts and not just feelings. That said, we also work with clients by delivering qualitative research, so we overlay some of the feelings on top of that. That's enough about us for now. Thank you to all of the attendees who have submitted questions beforehand. We've taken those questions and we've lumped them, really, broadly speaking, into 5 sections. So the first is DNA. How is the DNA of an organisation changing, and what is the impact on that on organisation design of the future? As a result of the situation that we're in now, we're seeing organisations implementing digital transformation programmes at speed. So what is the impact of that on those organisations? I think more importantly, how do we build a business that is resilient enough for the future? And then what is the impact of that on the traits that we need in our leaders? And then finally, we'll come to a summary of the do's and don'ts. Everybody has submitted them. So Denise, I've got Denise's do's and don'ts ready because she'll have disappeared by then. But the do's and don'ts of org design. So let's make sure that we're learning from people's errors as well as successes. So if we kick off with the piece around DNA change and org design, I'll just give you a moment to read this. So this for me is really interesting. So Linda Mountford is at Thai Union. And the bit for me that was fascinating was Linda joined a panel of ours, I think, in April. And this was about HR has been put on the map. You know, just full stop. We have been elevated at about time too, but we have been elevated and put on the map. And so I'd like to start when we're talking about OD with you, Hugo. And perhaps we could start by saying, you know, what are you looking for when you're looking for an organisation design or effectiveness director? And how has that changed, if at all, in the last 12 months?
Yeah, no, sure. Well, thanks, and good morning, everyone. Great to be back on another breakfast panel. Interesting, the last comment about HR being put on the map. I spoke to an HR director last week who said he's been working his whole life to have HR taken seriously at board level, and it's just taken a pandemic to make that happen. So finally, we're getting there. I think we've talked already before about what people are looking for in this time from a capability perspective. So I'm not going to talk about innovation, resourcefulness. You know, those are all of the things that we've spoken about before. I think right now, what we need from ODs and heads of OD is a decision-making capability and working with their business to make decisions. I think in times like this, there can be a tendency to over-consult and not make decisions, maybe be a bit nervous about making hard decisions and being decisive, worrying about how that might impact. But we've certainly seen that that can then stagnate change, which means that employees then begin to question their leaders, and actually it can have a negative impact. So I think heads of OD need to be able to facilitate that with their leaders and make sure decisions are made. I think data is clearly one of the key elements here, because of course you can make those decisions and be decisive if you know who your workforce are. So working with the data and pulling the people analytics together and using those insights are crucial to any OD's capability. And then, I mean, these are facets of heads of OD that already existed. But the other key one for me right now is influence, and that's up and down. I think that you need to be able to work with their leadership teams to ensure they're making the right decisions. They almost need to be the maverick of the HR leadership team. They're the people questioning everything, talking about innovation, challenging, but equally I think it's very important that beneath them, within the employee population, people are challenging the heads of OD and provoking questions, because that helps them achieve what they want to achieve. So those are some of the key things that we've seen that have always been part of org design, but I think are even more exaggerated at the moment.
Thank you. Sarah, could we talk to you a bit as kind of an OD expert? Not even kind of, actually, forgive me, I don't know where that phrase came from. But as someone who focuses purely on OD rather than some of the broader challenges as well, what are the kind of principles and models that have come into play in the last 6 months? And what are the ones that have worked and not worked?
Yeah, very good. So, hi everybody. I think one of the things that I find fascinating is, inevitably some of the models that we've been using for a long time stand true and still apply right now. I think, as anything, today's time allows you to dial certain things up and dial certain things down. Yeah. So a couple of things that I have found really interesting. I mean, typically, you'd be hard pushed to be thinking in OD terms if you were thinking of a sort of a Galbraith type model or a STAR model or something like that. I mean, it's a tried and tested way of thinking about how you redesign your organization, even, going through sort of loops around op model. All that said, I see 3 sort of pressure points in businesses right now, which I think OD can really begin to sort of speak to, which are very much driven by today's environment. Yeah. Some you'll think, well, that's obvious, and some you'll probably think, well, it's a natural knock-on effect. Yeah. The first is, of course, we've sort of, in theory, transformed the ways of working. Yeah, I mean, depending on what business you were in, almost overnight, everybody up sticks and went to work at home. Look at us all right now. I always find it, I never ceases to find it fascinating where we're all sitting. The challenge with that is we didn't necessarily change the way we worked. We took almost an office-bound way of working and digitized it. Yeah? And I think you'll all remember some of the Zoom challenges at the beginning and some of the exhaustion that we had. I think we haven't quite yet learned to redesign how we work. I think we've simply taken the way we used to work in an office home. Yes, I think there's some real pressure on ways of working. Yeah. The second thing I see, and I think this is, Hugo, to a degree what you were describing, I see real pressure in how leadership teams make decisions. Yeah, there is too much, almost too much information. There are too many meetings, too high participation. There's lots of information share and lots of information broadcast. And inclusivity has gone up. So there's some amazing positives, but I think leaders are really struggling with the volume of decisions that need to be made and haven't quite got a grasp on how that is then, the accountability is placed or distributed throughout the organization. And I think leadership teams are really struggling in that particular place. The third bit is, I would say, is around the sort of capabilities, if you like. I think this has allowed organizations to really prioritize what is important and what is not. Yeah, they learnt within their organization the things that they've invested in that have stood them to good test right now, and they've equally learnt stuff that they might have thought was important just isn't. Yeah, so I think there's been a real focus on sort of prioritizing capabilities. So I think if that's the roundabout way of thinking about that, OD model, the source of it, I think, remains the same. I think we can use a lot of tools of old. I think that the quest is to sort of use that lens to evaluate today's environments. And I think those are 3 kind of pressure points, certainly, that I see.
Fascinating. Denise, you were nodding your head frantically. You were talking particularly about kind of the capabilities and prioritizing what's important and what's not.
Absolutely. I think you need to make sure that you've got the right people in the right roles when you're in a distributed environment, because you know, when you're all together, sometimes you can lean in and make up for gaps in competency and capability. Whereas when you're in a virtual environment, I think that's a lot harder to be able to counter that. So I think it's really important to get the structure right for your organisation and have the right people in those roles.
Yeah, and it's interesting because if you then take that into then fostering the collaborative culture that we talk about, when we ran our first HR panel, or the first of kind of in the COVID world, one of the comments that came out of that was we couldn't have paid for the level of collaboration that we've now got across our team, across our competitors, across our industries. That just wouldn't have existed 6 weeks ago. So Anna, perhaps you could pick up particularly on this. How do we make sure that we foster and retain that collaborative culture when we've got a workforce that's still really distributed?
It's funny. You just put your finger into my biggest worry. My biggest worry is that we unlearn what we have learned during the crisis. So, and I'm sure this has been everyone's experience, but I get, every time I repeat that story, I feel I can't believe my own words, right? What I think we have learned, and we have been, luckily, I have a workforce of people where not everyone was allowed to work from home at the beginning. Actually, 15,000 of my people were not allowed to work from home because they work in shops and they work in contact center, and we didn't have the technology to do that and all the rest of it. Guess what? It took a pandemic to be able to make them work from home, isn't it? So the way we describe it is we did what we thought was impossible. Now, that's not an OD principle, but if I distill OD principles from that, we have learned that, number one, we have choices. We have choices, more choices than we thought we would, right? My second OD principle is process does not substitute good judgment. We all remember it, and I'm sure Denise, you've been right in it, right? At the very beginning, there was no process to go through. What do we do? Okay, so the office people can go to work from home, right? Do they have the equipment? Do they have the technology? Do they know how to do it? And all the rest of it. But at the same time, I have people in studio for BT Sport. There is a broadcast system, and I got, 10,000 people in contact center that didn't have the technology, didn't have the platform to work from home, didn't have the security access to work. How the hell do you do it? There was no process. There was no, as much as we had all our business continuity plan and all the contingency of the work, the reality is that we found ourselves making big, bold decisions, and there is no substitute for taking a judgment call as a leadership team and say, right, what do we do? I think that has to be an OD principle going forward, right? Process is important, role design is critical, capability, all the rest of it is really important, but there is a point where you have to go with your beliefs and you have to make those judgments. So what else have we learned? We have learned that we have to go personal.
Yeah.
I think that's a big learning. We have to go personal because it works slightly different for all of us, as we have shared, and there's only one way to make it work, is make people believe that it can be done. Yeah. And I think that's a big one. So if I summarize it, sorry, I don't want to take too much time, but the way I work with the team on this is like COVID has taught us to ask ourselves the question of why not. And I think the practitioner, more than anyone else, has spent an awful lot of time and effort to sit at the table, convincing leaders on why should we do something different. I think the question now is why not?
Yeah, I love that, Anna, and please don't ever apologize for talking. Everyone will be hanging on to your every word. I think that last piece, which is what's the opportunity and challenge in this, for me, I'd love to hear from others, but actually the opportunity is why not? Absolutely. Why would we not do this? But the challenge you've talked about is then the personalization. Denise.
Yeah, I was just going to say, so just building on Anna's, she talked about job types who traditionally weren't able to work at home. I've got people across over 30 countries, and just culturally in some countries, you know, it's very hierarchical. You don't want people to work at home. You would only do it on how long they've been there. Once they've been there 5 years, they're allowed to work 1 day a week at home. We're an analytics company. And it's just thrown everything up in the air, because we've proved that we can, and we've proved that people deliver. I saw one of the questions in the chat about right people in the right roles. I mean, something we're moving to in the performance space is very much around trying to judge people on outcomes rather than just what they're doing, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So it's business outcomes.
Completely, and actually some of that we'll touch a bit later when we're talking about a skills first rather than a role first organisation, because I think that's fascinating. Yeah, we need to look at that. Sarah?
Yeah, so I was taken by the choice and the thinking around design. I think your organisation is always designed whether you choose deliberately to do it or not. So I think the point about, you know, now is a moment for us to be making more active choices. I think when I look at the overall opportunity, what I see is, of course, we all experience this instant digital working from home. And I think, you know, certainly it was almost like a shock phase for everybody. And I think we've learned to cope. And again, I start to see, you know, sort of initiatives around bringing people back into the office in, you know, in the various different ways that is sensible. And I think what that looks like to me as I look at it is people to a certain degree trying to get back to normal. Mm-hmm. And I think this is the moment where we now have more freedom than we had probably 4 months ago, where we were just completely locked down and we couldn't do anything. I think what we need to, I don't think we've really begun to think about what the redesign looks like. Yeah, I think we're still partly adapting, and we're thinking that we've got to adapt by going back to how we used to do it. I think that's a point, it's a choice for us, and it's a moment for us to be able to think, what alternative models might we wish to employ and how might we wish to actively do it different, rather than just sort of trying to work out how do we manage social distancing and all of the various different complexities, you know, back in the office.
I was just going to build on that, Sarah, and just say, yeah, we've kicked off a big piece of work called Future of the Workplace for exactly that reason, because I think how you won't just be going back to work and sit in rows of desks. That, you know, some people want to do that, but majority of people don't want to do that. What people want to come into the office for now is interaction, collaboration, whiteboarding, all of those types of things. So I think the workspace is going to really change, and we've proved that you don't need to go and just sit in there in lines of desks. So we're doing a big piece of work. So it might not be that actually your footprint reduces significantly because you need more breakout spaces, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the workplace and how we operate and that we design that into our thinking for the workforce is definitely going to change. And we've got a big piece of work with, they're reporting back to me, the team, we've got a team kind of across function and cross global, because there are different cultures as well of how this plays, kind of coming back to me beginning of October. So I'm excited to see what they've come up with.
Yeah, and I think, and we'll come into in a second, because it's my job. I think I always get told this afterwards that I'm really bad at moving people into sections, so we'll do that. But Sarah, you said something that for me is fascinating. I think you're right. There's lots of organisations that are kind of looking at things now, but they're still reacting in many ways. But actually overlaying that, I think there's the business leaders are going, actually, there is a fundamental opportunity for us to completely rethink our business model. And that it takes time to do, and it needs to be done properly. But actually, I think that we're feeling that in all organisations. Here, Denise said, I'm really excited to hear what the team is going to come back to me with in October, because this is an opportunity. Let me swiftly move us from that into the impact of digitalisation at speed. Because I think this is important, because we touched on this, that everyone talks about digital transformation projects and digital transformation leads, but actually very rarely outside of the digital transformation, inside the digital transformation project, are there people thinking about what does that mean in terms of our skills, our locations, our people, our culture, and making sure that actually a transformation project includes people. So perhaps we could talk a little about, Denise, you've touched on collaborative spaces. Anna, what are you kind of doing or seeing or hearing around the impact on space and on real estate?
So I had two observations on this one. Number one, people talk about digital, the word is digital, and there's a lot of very different meanings of what digital is, right? We all have become digital customers overnight when we got into lockdown. But we are seeing that customers have got different preferences, right? So if I look at my business, I switched my channel from having shops open across the country, 600 of those, to people upgrading over the phone contact center or digitally, right, on the websites. There was no other choice to do it. That didn't make us digital, isn't it? That didn't make us as a nation digital. I mean, people have acquired digital skills. They realize that, you know, individually we have realized you can talk to your GP without necessarily have to go and queue up and make an appointment at the practice and all the rest of it. But is this a preference that people would choose to do? That's all to be demonstrated. I think customer preference. My 4-year-old daughter said to me, "Mommy, I want to go in a shop to buy new shoes for school," right? She didn't want to buy them online. I was like, "Oh, well, you know, we have to wear a mask and it's crowded and all the rest of it." But I think we have to remember that as human beings, as much as we have coped really well working in, you know, in isolation at the back of our bedroom or in the garden or wherever, we are lacking human interaction. I think customers want the experience. You know, there's nothing that compares to go into a shop and, you know, and try on a new dress and decide if you like it or not, and try maybe a few and have a cup of tea with your friend, right? The experience is what matters. So we have to be, I think, really smart at thinking that digital has to become not the only option. Because I don't believe as humans we want it. When we redesign, we are redesigning, we have redesigned our spaces. Now, luckily, we are a technology company, so we got a few tips maybe to share, you know, how to make this hybrid model work and all the rest of it, you know, collaboration, virtual collaboration, all the rest of it. But we have to remember that if we had a choice, we wouldn't go only digital, would you? And I think we have to be careful to listen to customers, see what behaviors have changed and are changing again and will change in 6 months, and try to listen to our colleagues and understand how can we balance and find, you know, it's a tricky line, balancing the need for digital versus the need for human interaction and the benefit of being sometimes together in one room, even if social distanced, to problem solve together. I mean, I had a big problem solving session yesterday with 4 of my team in an office that could have accommodated 25, right? But everyone walked away with a big smile on their face. Could we have done it virtually? Of course, we did it for 6 months, didn't we? But the additional benefit of being in it together, I think, will not go away.
I completely agree. And Denise, before you, I know you need to switch off, so I'm going to come to you, and then Hugo, I'll come to you afterwards, because I know we've only got 2 minutes left of Denise's wisdom. So I'd like to grab as much of that 2 minutes as we can.
I'm just going to build on what Anna said. I think it's real preference as well, you know, depending on the role you do, your personality type, and, you know, but then there's also thinking about people. Even those people who are introverted doing a job where they code all day, I think us as HR professionals have a responsibility to make sure that people don't become too isolated, because with the choice, they may say, oh, I'm happy here. But there's a real piece on mental health that we need to make sure that you do need some social interaction as a human being. And if we let people get too isolated, then that's a massive concern point for me as well. So I mean, I absolutely echo everything Anna said around just being that collaboration and whiteboarding, solving problems. Yes, you can do it virtually, but sometimes you don't do it as quickly or as in such a potentially enjoyable way, I hate to say it, by having to do it. We haven't quite cracked all the technology on whiteboarding virtually and all those types of things that you would still do. So I think there's a place, you know, definitely I think COVID-19 hopefully will change the world for the better in how we work and how we design and set up ourselves as organisations, in that there'll be a better balance from a work-life perspective. But I do think there's still a place for collaboration and interaction going forward.
Completely agree. Denise, thank you. If you slip off,
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Had a massive thank you from all of us for your time. Sarah, what are you seeing in terms of the impact on skills, different skills that organisations need, and how they're reacting to that?
So I'm fascinated by, of course, we're talking about digital skills. I think we're talking about the use of digital tools, and I think there has been, of course, there's been a massive uptake in Microsoft. Must be, there's a couple of organisations loving all of
Other
this.
Organisations are
loving all of this, yeah. But I think what I'm seeing is that people are using the tools rather than, and the tool sort of feels at the forefront, yeah. We haven't really got to the stage where we've actually thought, well, what work do we need to do, and therefore how and when and why should we do it? Yeah, I think we're all sort of defaulting back to what we think is the new medium to get there. Yeah, I think one of the things, just very conscious of what I think has just happened across the sort of the world of work, and it's one of the things I sort of say it to people all of the time. It's one of the easiest things you could do to transform your organization, to increase productivity. It reduces complexity, and it's free, yet you never do it. Yeah, and I often say this to kind of, well, what is this thing that is amazing but organizations never do? And it is like stopping work. Yeah, stop things, don't do things. Yeah. And what I found right now is that is something that has either happened by chance, by necessity. People have found themselves more meaningfully employed doing other things. Yeah, so often people don't stop because, of course, it's political, it's attached to them, their ego's involved in it, or their job's involved in it. So people do not wish to give up work. But I think this is one of the things that's really kind of coming through right now, the ability to really prioritize what work is important, what work is valuable, what work drives outcomes. And I think we've been able to do that more effectively now than probably we've ever done in the past.
I think that's really true, and I'm going to bring that on when we get into the next stage, which is all about actually building a business that's resilient for the future. I wanted to touch on the tools piece for me, and this is a little bit of, bear with us. I want to showcase a piece of Stratagens as part and parcel of this, but actually, as Lisa Cole said from Staples, there is data there now to inform decisions. And I think that HR need, and Hugo talked about this, actually heads of OD needing to be much more data savvy and data efficient in order to make some of the decisions. And managing risks and building organizations and OD design and new skills and all of those sorts of things come into play when we're talking about data. And I'm just going to show you, so this is a screenshot that I grabbed from Stratagens on the supply to demand of data engineers in Birmingham, Boston and Mumbai. And I did that this morning. It took me 6 seconds to produce this data. I then said, okay, and where are the recommendations? Show me the recommendations for what are the hot spots and the not spots for data engineers. And I ran it globally. And again, it produced the results in 6 seconds. And then this is where I think it starts to get really cute, is we said, okay, and what's the breakdown of that supply? So what's the breakdown of permanent to contractor work? So when we're genuinely talking about building agile or flexible organizations, how ready are organizations for that breaking down of work that you talked about, that breaking down of, should it be flexible? Should it be agile? Should it be permanent? Should it be contractor? What do you think, Sarah?
Does Hugo want to answer that question?
Well touched. Yeah, Hugo, I'm sorry. Let me throw that at you because you've been quiet.
I know.
I think, of course, people need to broaden out their capability. It doesn't matter whether you're a head of OD or an HR director. We need to be able to, everybody sitting in a leadership position needs to be able to broaden out what they do. I don't think we can have specialisms in particular areas. People will need to cover for other people too. And And actually, I think that will then define the culture. So the common themes will be the way people approach things for a particular organisation. I think going back to Anna's comment on the human side of things, from a search perspective, that's interesting because, of course, the fact that we're all working in a digital world now has made our processes more efficient. We're faster at producing shortlists now because actually we can get hold of everybody because they're sitting at home and they're happy to speak to headhunters. So, but what we need to do is then push it up to the final stage when, of course, people want to meet one another. Yeah. So, we've had instances where, there are two final candidates and they're met by the CEO in the car park in one instance for a big FMCG company. So I think going back to this question, I think we need to be, capabilities need to be diverse, even though you still have your specialism. So there'll be a core competency amongst the leadership team.
Yeah, really interesting. Thank you. Hugo. I think
a lot of administrative work, a lot of work that, I've certainly found certain roles. I mean, we've all become our own PAs, our own logistics, certain things I think was, whole, parts and organizations were responsible for. And I think some of the work has moved away. Now, a lot of what I've been working on, and again, it might be where you're heading to, Alison, is sort of like a future of work. And a lot of conversation is, and I'm sure this works for you, is like sort of automation and how that, almost like how that begins to sort of creep in an organization and how that then begins to change the fundamental of job design and how that moves people sort of up a value chain there. But I think this again is another, I think automation, always the principles of that was, do we absolutely need to do it before we begin to invest in automating it? And I think an environment like now is pretty fascinating because it strips away quite a few things that we might have in the past invested in doing differently. But actually right now we realize, actually, did we ever really need to do some of the things that an organization is built to deliver upon? Or could we do that in a very different way? And I think it again, back to what we're saying about choices, I think there are some real big sort of open sort of choices to be made by organizations right now about what work to do and what work not to do.
Yeah, and I think it's, and you're right, and yeah, I'm not trying to lead us actually into future of work, because whenever we open the conversation with an organization or a client about the future of work, it's almost too scary, it's almost too far away, and actually the focus needs to be on this breaking down of roles into tasks, and what are those tasks and what are those skills and where are they best done, and how does that mean we shape the organization. It's much, I was going to say it's much more tactical, but it isn't. It's still very strategic, but actually it's almost the building blocks that need to happen before an organization can get anywhere near thinking about the future of work and automation, which I think is fascinating. Anna, does that kind of ring true with some of the work that you're doing?
I think it does. I think we are trying to do, like everyone else, isn't it, agile. We are trying to adopt the whole agile methodology. Remember, technology companies try to do that. And we are trying to understand how to crack it, because some days I look at it and I'm like, oh God, we are really getting tractions in terms of outcome that are becoming true sooner than we anticipated. So it's like, it's working. Some other, I'm not denying, I look at it and it looks like by accident more than by design, right? So it's more because people are so keen to win, to succeed, to get it done, than because we have cracked the OD side of it. So I am a bit, I'm a believer, right? I'm somebody who believes that anything is possible in life. So I'll go with that flow, but sometimes it feels a little scary. And I'm like, and what if it doesn't work? Do I have clarity on the risks I'm managing, having these 700 of people working agile and redesigning our proposition for the future? What if we go completely off the path? Because empowerment and agile implies that you don't necessarily have complete clarity which way you're going, because you do trust the method, right? I tend to trust people more than the method, so I have to challenge my own culture as well in that. It can be daunting at days, but I think equally, is the way to design the future. Otherwise, you never do it. So we have to go with it. And again, the last 6 months has given us the opportunity to just know that it can be done. But there is an awful lot of learning. You know, I wouldn't be able to say these are exactly the capabilities we need to develop. If I had to pick one, I would say the ability to do gaming. Learning through gaming is a big one, which I think very few companies got their head around.
Yeah, I think that's very true. Sarah,
So
yes. So one of the
model
things
versus gut.
one of the things I've found helpful for organizations who are thinking about, you know, what skills they need in the future is almost a sort of a scenario planning exercise. It's very difficult to truly know where your business is headed. Yeah. And the further time frame out, the harder it becomes. And to a certain degree, if you say where your business is in 10 years' time, executives are really imagining something that probably isn't 10 years hence. It's a lot closer than they think, but it's quite helpful to have that discussion. What I've found helpful is that you have maybe 3 different future scenarios. Yeah, so you're not putting all your eggs in one basket, and you don't have to be that precise. But we could be a bit like this, and we could be a bit like that, and we could be something else like that. And if your executive team can kind of buy that, we will probably be one of these 3. You can then start to work back, you know, a sort of a capability type lens on that to say, well, if you were this one, what capabilities would you need? And if you were that one, what capabilities would you? And you will find there's great commonality across those. So it helps a degree of confidence of saying we need to build these capabilities, because regardless of which of the scenarios come true, we're still going to need these skills. Yeah? And I think it's a way of helping leaders think about something that, of course, they can't possibly predict, but it's a helpful way of sort of bringing that so you can make sort of investment decisions now that feel like they're no regret steps.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. Now, forgive me, I put the poll up slightly prematurely, so I'm just going to see if I can go backwards and see if I can get the poll to.
Just jump in on Sarah's comment, Ali, just for a second.
Yeah, of course you can. I'll mess around and try and find the poll while you do that, Hugo. That would be really helpful.
I think the kind of options that you're talking about, because of course we don't know what the outcome will be, and we're all in the unknown, and there's no rule book. Is interesting from a capability from heads of OD, because one of the things we've found is they don't want people to be too prescriptive. So if you're looking at the ideal heads of OD background, you'd have diverse industry sectors, different scales of companies, so that they don't come in thinking, right, this is what I've done before, because of course we've never been here before. So I think again, being innovative and being able to make decisions before they're ready to be made is a really key capability for any head of OD.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And then how do you take that data? So I'm going to try and launch the poll now. If we end up somewhere else, I'll abandon doing a poll, but hopefully this will work. I'm just going to leave that up for a second. So I've asked people now to vote, hopefully they can see that, on the resources that are currently being used to influence the board around people decisions. So we'll just give it a minute. If everybody could just pop their votes in there.
Why aren't we allowed to vote?
No,
I was just about to apologise. I failed miserably to tick the box that says allow panelists to vote. You're not allowed to see it. So, can you see what's on the screen? I've got no idea.
Yeah.
So that's quite interesting, actually. So there's not really a real winner in any of these. So we're now on more than 70% of people who have voted, and actually there's a whole bunch of people who are using, as you would expect, people analytics and internal research. But if I pick up on that thought process, which is we want diversity, we want to think differently, we want to bring a different perspective in that you were just talking about, Hugo, that doesn't come from internal, that comes from outside looking in. And yet I think this is fascinating. The majority of organizations are still using internal data because it's the easiest to find, I think. Thank you for that, everybody who completed the poll. It went more successfully than I thought it would. How do you help an organisation, Sarah, when it's kind of looking towards the future, the horizon scan? How do you help them kind of go through that process and horizon scan and think about what is coming?
Do you mean the process that sits behind it, or from a, yeah. So I mean, like many sort of OD, exercises, to a certain degree, any choice that's made is only ever as good as the executive or leaders wish to make. Yeah. So often there is always an ideal state. There's always there's never a right answer yet. And I think one of the things that I typically take people through is trying to get to a degree of consensus that the option upon which the executive team is most prepared to put a bet. Yeah. And once you've created one step there, then you can sort of begin to sort of move forward. Yeah. One of the things that I find, and again, I've sort of just have the board question in my mind, is that the boards are typically influenced, and by default, I'm also thinking senior executive teams, by one of two things. Yeah. One of those is broadly around the culture in your organization. Yeah. So it is by taking this action, we will be able to, enhance or adhere to or build or contribute to the culture that we have. So that, boards are typically interested in that, and how that then gets evidenced in terms of change. And the second, which is a no surprise, is can we control it? Yeah. Can we influence it? Can we measure it? Can we change it? Yeah. So I think, inevitably with leaders, depending on the source of where your analytics come from, your data come from, I think can be phenomenally varied. But I think if it can be channeled into those two things, and boards are, they're happy with the broad, it's cultural, it feels more or less tangible. If there's then an element of, if we change this, there is a method in which we can monitor it, measure it, and count it. And I think if we're smart, we put those two things together.
Now, it's without us having talked about this is going to sound like we've prepped it, and actually we haven't. It's just minds working in the same way. But I think we are moving towards a world where the board is going to do skills audits, and in fact will be forced to do skills audits in order to be able to say we have the right capabilities at the table in order to deliver our competitive strategy. And I think that's a fascinating one. I don't know how quickly we're going to get there, and it may not be board, it may be exec team, as you say, but actually this real focus on skills and capability and business strategy and competitive advantage for the first time. And I think that leads to a board that challenges HR in a much stronger way, perhaps, than has been challenged before, and demands, whether it's data, whether it's gut feel, they demand something that sits behind what they are hearing. And actually the board is going to want to see diversity of thought. So I think we're heading to quite a different world. Anna, yeah.
Sorry, I couldn't help it, because I think this is very much something that we are dealing with every day. I just wanted to offer slightly different, or maybe it's not the same directions, but just our contribution is, what I heard is we are talking about being bold, we are talking about mindset, right? One thing we have done at our consumer board, we have given each other's roles. So there's somebody that sits in consumer board who's the agitator, who's the person that works with me on the people agenda, who offers always a very diverse perspective, quite disruptive at times, but we have given, so each of us at leadership level have got like double hats, right? I'm the one that comes up with the disruptive business idea, and my digital colleague is the one that comes up with the agitation on the people agenda. And by giving each other permission to work together on something which is not our own territory, we do make sure we get diversity of thinking. Because and I think sometimes that's all you need, isn't it? It's just table it. I have a session this afternoon with him, and I know he's going to come with 10 ideas, and my hair will just go straight and say, oh, can't do this, it's not in the plan, haven't got capacity, you know, all of that. But there is such a richness in the conversation that brings us both into the future. So each other, we got, when we get together, it's fascinating. This is a journey we started when I joined, and people were a little bit reluctant, as it happens, because it's all a little bit weird, isn't it? And sometimes you accept that you have to have the humility to have a stupid idea, right? And to accept that actually it's not a very clever idea, and that's okay. So I think we have brought a whole different dimension of leadership as a team, and it really makes sure that we move into the future. We don't inevitably settle into something which is okay for today, but might not be okay for the future.
And I'm going to ask for your patience again while I just show you some pieces from Stratagens, but as with the very next section after that will be, what is the impact on the traits of leaders that we need? And I think, Anna, you know, you hit the nail on the head. You know, kind of permission to interfere, and also permission to make mistakes. So we will pick up on that when I've taken a few moments of your time to show you. So when we're thinking back to these kind of skills audits and business capabilities, we believe that actually there's kind of 10 things that are now involved in people's strategy and OD, not all of which would have been there before. So the first, location and the availability of skills and the breakdown of that skill. So everything that I'm showing you here is data that we've pulled off Stratagens. The second is actually what is the ability of that skill to remote work in the location that it is. Yeah, and that's a purely broadband speed connection and data. So that doesn't take into account some of the personal elements of a personal environment. But if you're looking at a skill set overall, we then think that actually there's this whole piece around personalization of work, and we touched on this. Some people want to commute, and you know what? A whole bunch of people don't. But it's getting that balance right. Or they don't want to work, or they don't want to commute 5 days a week. They may want to do it 2 days a week or whatever it is, and an adaptation around that. And that then links into what's the cost of living for people, and are we as organizations now in a space where we genuinely need to think about this stuff when we're putting together our workforces? Should we think about different roles, how they break down, and what the cost of living is based on the salary levels, for example, of that role? And I think we have a duty. We're moving to the point where we do have a duty to do that. The information you would expect a board to be considering: what's the ease of doing business and what's the business environment like, but also what's the risk and the growth in particular areas right now. We then look at things like what's the workforce composition and what's the workflow. So we're doing some pretty funky stuff at the moment where we're looking at the flow of engineering talent around the UK. So which universities do they start in? Where do they end up going? Which industries do they end up going? And then which countries? And then breaking that down by gender and breaking that down by ethnicity to see where the differences are. And then what's the workplace like? Actually, what's the infrastructure like? And I guess critically in today's world, what's the health like? What is the health of our organization internally and externally like? And then how attractive are we to the skills that we need to deliver in the future? And we believe that these kind of 10 factors, it's the first time really that talent, HR, business, strategy, OD really comes into one place, and we think should be part of a skills audit. If I had got time, I'd ask you all to explore and comment on that, but I should get told off if I do. But also I want to make sure that we pick up on the point that you made, Anna, around traits for leaders. So Hugo, what are you hearing about the traits for leaders, particularly in CPOs and heads of OD, but also wider than that?
Well, interesting. I think this is about authenticity and actually, without sounding too scary, that employees are slightly judging their employers right now on how they're acting. So I've had a number of discussions with very senior people who are sitting tight in jobs, but aren't really approving of the way the business is acting. You know, when policy defined what we do, i.e. you need to stay at home because it's policy, that was kind of fine. When there was choice on how we come back to work, whether we come back to work and what it looks like, then suddenly people are questioning the decisions that are being made. So I have had a few conversations, I'm afraid, with people who are saying, you know, I don't like the way we're doing this, and whether that's putting pressure on employees to come back to work or whatever it is. So I think going back to the trades question, you know, I think leaders it won't be forgotten how they're acting right now, you know, and they need to align their decisions to the values and the purpose of the organization. And that is really the key reason why people work for companies now. You know, it's not money. Money's in the top 5, but actually what that company stands for, how it works with its community, and how it looks after its employees is fundamentally the number one now.
And that's only going to get, you know, more obvious over the next years. Anna?
I could not agree more, Hugo. I think the voice of people has been heard more during this last 6 months, and people are judging their leaders. And one of the dimensions I think they're judging is what, you know, are they true role modeling the purpose and the values of the company? Are they living them and breathing them through the difficult decisions? And how vulnerable can they be? I think, you know, when you talk about authenticity, people want to see that everyone struggles with the homeschooling thingy and, you know, and they want to know how personal it is to our leaders as well. One of the most powerful messages we got across was every Friday we get together during the crisis. Every Friday we will have like 5,000 people for an hour on one of those big, gigantic digital calls with no slides, called Let's Talk, right? Where people, I mean, to be honest, it was a bit nerve-wracking at the beginning, I'm not denying, could ask any question from, you know, anything from anything, right? And what I think showed to be really powerful is seeing our leaders just working from the bedroom and having their children on their lap sometimes, right? And all the rest of the stuff that we all know, but showing up as leader and human and being vulnerable and accepting that mental health is a challenge for everyone, right? I think is so powerful. And people will decide, I've got many conversations, people will decide which company they want to work for in the future based on what we have done over the last 6 months.
Yeah, I agree.
Completely agree.
Big time. So couldn't agree more.
Now, we've got 3 minutes, so I'm not going to run the next poll. Otherwise, I shall get into huge amounts of trouble for running over. So I'm going to go to the summary. And the summary is linked to what are your top tips on org design, how we do it, and what are our do's and don'ts. To give the panel a moment, I shall read, forgive me, because Denise has had to disappear at 9. So Denise gave me her top tips first. So I'm going to start with what do you see go wrong most often and how to best avoid it. And I thought this was fascinating. So Denise said that people build organizations around talent rather than the roles that are needed. And you need to be brave and you need to take some tough calls. And she's put in brackets, it's not easy, to build the right organization structure, even if you have to evolve it over time so you can swap out talent. You will never get the efficiency or full effectiveness building roles around talent, even if they are great. They may not be what your organization needs. And then, so her top tips for do's and don'ts in a post-COVID world: do over-communicate, do put your camera on, and make sure your team does, because it builds relationships. Don't totally think that virtual can replace human interaction. Think it'll be a balance going forward. And think about how you build a resilient organization and resilient people. People want to know what the future holds. Be open, be transparent, and even if it's difficult, make sure you give them the messages. So that's a pretty good summary. No pressure. Anna, how would you go with your what goes wrong with it and top tips and do's? And we've got a minute left, so speedy, please.
I will try to be speedy. So on the do's, I would say go fast forward into the future. Use the power of why not, and create roles where people got space to win.
Oh, I love it.
On the don'ts, and the don't do it, don't unlearn the crisis, don't ignore the voice of key workers, and don't continue to say we have to be very careful.
I love those. Sarah.
There you go.
Okay, so I would say the do is always start with the business strategy. Inevitably, organization design has strayed for many reasons because that isn't fundamentally clear. So do not go back, do not forget to go back to business strategy. And I think as well, I think we've all emphasized this, the other key do is to sort of be led by employee choice. Yeah, be very careful around, you know, imposing. Your lived experience is not the same as everybody else's lived experience, and do not think that because everybody's got their children on their laps or the dogs in the background that makes your lived experience the same. I think, you know, leaders who have been genuinely empathetic are the ones who recognize that, you know, others' lives are not the same. And I think that again is another big do here.
Brilliant. Hugo.
Right, I will be quick. So I've got do embrace disruption, but do be decisive, do innovate, don't over consult or be overly prescriptive, and actually don't forget your culture and what your values are whilst we're all in this moment of time.
Those are fantastic. And then we have, and I'm not going to do 3 do's and don'ts, but for me, when I listen to our clients and what they're saying do link business strategy and people, and genuinely do it. So that ties very much in with what Sarah is saying. And they're also saying do have data to allow yourself to benchmark. And actually that enables you to make decisions with confidence. It enables you to make decisions quickly. And it enables you to have some substance to what you're saying. Our largest global FMCG data, client says some data is better than no data because at least people will listen. And I think that's fascinating. We've had a lot of questions that we haven't had a chance to get to through the Q&A. As the panelists know, we had a whole bunch of questions beforehand that people had pre-submitted. So what we'll do, if the panelists are willing to do it, is I'll arrange for those questions to go offline. If people could provide their answers to them, that would be fantastic. And then we'll include those answers in the follow-up that we send to people, which I think would be a really nice way of doing it. For us, clearly this is about stratagems, but actually more importantly, it's about the linking of business strategy to organisation design. But more importantly, over all of that, it's about hearing from the panelists, because every single time we run one of these events in partnership with Tucker Stone, we get absolute nuggets of wisdom from people who are seeing and doing and living and breathing this stuff right now. So a thank you to Denise. Hugo, thank you again. We love partnering with Tucker Stone. You always bring an enthusiasm and also really interesting insight from lots of different perspectives. Sarah, a massive thank you. You must be dreading having another virtual coffee with me, but I love it, and thank you that we've managed to get this far. And Anna, thank you so much for agreeing to do this. We didn't know each other before. I hope we'll get to know each other better from now on. Thank you everybody for your time this morning. We much appreciate it. Panelists, if you could hang fire for a moment, that would be great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Very good.